Fuego, I stay on the block like Lego. What's that? I'm calling a blitz for the.
Instead of having politicians, let's imagine a world that is led by creatives. If we could select artists that could be in the positions of power, what would the world look like in the next 5 years?
Us, never them. It's 100 that I'm better than. Got the pack, tell them send it in. I suck all of politics. They ain't no scholarships. Me and my rubbish, just drop it. I tell them spin back. This ain't no diss track. Look, but I got a big bag. I tell my head is gonna hit that. Look, what's that? Gossip. See him in person, they now.
Richard, welcome to the Shades of Life Impact podcast.
And thank you, Ingrid, for having me today. I am excited to have this conversation with you.
Thank you. So together we are gonna talk art and the messages that one can vehicle through art. But first I wanted to ask you, so where are you from and where are you in the world right now?
Okay, thank you. I am originally from Zimbabwe, but I currently live and work between Cape Town, which is in South Africa, and Harare, which is in Zimbabwe, which is my home city. So currently now with this podcast, I'm in Cape Town.
Okay, perfect. So you're the first guest from Cape Town, Zimbabwe. So welcome
Fantastic.
again.
Happy to hear that.
I always like to add people to the map. You know, I have a globe that points to Africa today behind me. So very happy to have you.
Amazing.
So Richard, going back to your beginnings, can you tell us how did you become an artist, and have you been influenced or shaped by art from a young age, or did you develop a strong connection or affinity for it later in your life? What was the case for you?
I would say from an early age was interested in art and using my hands to create objects. At the time, I wasn't calling it art, I was just creating. But my family and my friends would then put the name art and artist to what I was doing. So I think my early recollections of me creating was with my grandfather in Zimbabwe, where he used to help me make clay figurines of cattle that we used to herd as a little boy when I was about 7 or 8 years old. And we would go and herd cattle in the field and in the bush, and then we would sit by the riverside as the cattle are drinking water, and we would collect the mud and then start creating these figurines of the bulls and of the other sort of cattle that we were herding. And I think that was, for me, the first time, and I would take these figurines, these clay sculptures, if I would say now, home, and I would display it in our home with my mom. But later on figured out that they would disintegrate because they were not fired. I didn't put them in a fire so that they could, they could hold their strength. But I think that was the lesson in the beginning with my grandfather, teaching me that I could use my hands to create objects, and objects of beauty, or something that is a representation of what exists in reality. And then I think from then on was then having a keen as a 12-year-old, 11-year-old with cartoon. I think at the time the influence of television in Africa at the time, and we were accessing American and European cartoons, and I would depict that in drawings. Wrestling, American wrestling also, the figures were something that I enjoyed doing figures of, like any little teenager, not a teenager, a young person at the time, interested in the culture of the time and trying to create posters and drawings and sharing it with my friends. At that time, I didn't even think that it was a career path. I was much more focused in my education. So was my parents also. But I always thought it was interesting that I was keen on creating and drawing. So I kept on doing it because there was this encouragement from my immediate community, my parents, and positive reactions. Then I met a group of artists who were living in my community who were actual artists that took me. One of them is Alan Kupeta, who was actually going to an art school in Zimbabwe at the time, which was part of the National Gallery of Zimbabwe visual arts program. And then he started impacting me sort of some of the basics of picture making, like drawing, So improving of what I have already been doing on my own without any instruction. And at one point I decided to write a letter to the National Arts Council of Zimbabwe, asking them if I wanted to be an artist, what would they require? So I thought it was maybe some requirement for someone to, at that time when I was about, I think that was in 1998, I wrote a letter to them, and then they sort of gave me an instruction and told me to go to the National Gallery of Zimbabwe, where they have an art school, which I knew about because this friend of mine, Alan Kupeta, was going there. And from then I was told I was too young to go to the school. I needed to finish my primary and my secondary education, which is high school. And then I would consider applying, submitting a portfolio for review to be part of the art school. But that I felt so at the time offended that they were telling me that I'm not an artist, whereas all my friends and my family were giving me the title. So I wrote another letter to a private gallery called Gallery Delta at the time, and I sent in my little drawings that I've made. And within about a month, they had replied to my letter, also giving me instruction that if I wanted to be an artist, I should focus on A, B, C, D. Until 7 exchanges of letters later, the gallery director at the time, Derek Huggins, he passed away, so God rest his soul. And he invited me to the gallery for the first time. I was 14 at the time and met what would be my mentor, Helen Liros, who was an extraordinary artist and mentor in Zimbabwe. And she took me under her wings when I was 14, way up until I was about 22 when I left for university to study another field. But I think I would say with Helen and my sort of journey starting was, for me, amongst the best education that one could have, because I had this community of artists in my hometown. And then I had this mentor who was actually a professional artist and a professional teacher, and who took me under her wings for over 8 years. And it was at a gallery, the only commercial gallery in Harare, Zimbabwe at the time. And then from there, having to see artworks in the gallery, meeting the artists who were creating those artworks, getting really involved in the contemporary art community in Zimbabwe at the time. And then with my conviction that I actually can and will wanted to be an artist, I think that then opened up the opportunity to say, this is what I really wanted to do. But there was a little bit of pushback because Zimbabwe, the community at the time was pushing for education. So my parents wanted me to have good grades and obviously go to the traditional career paths, which all my friends were also doing. So my friends were also either starting to go to university, which was something that was adored for someone to be able to have good grades and go to university and study for a profession. And at the time, there was no art education, but they encouraged me to continue getting good grades, which I did, because that was the thing amongst the community of my other friends at school, that education was important. So I got good grades. So I think the deal was, as long as I got good grades, I could still do my artwork on the side. So I studied all the way to senior high school, and I led to me going to university to study archaeology, cultural heritage, and museum studies, because at the time there was no a university degree for contemporary art or arts in any way. The only institution at the time was the Visual Arts School with the National Gallery of Zimbabwe. So I think I was privileged in that in my early years, I had 7 years of art education. And then when I wanted to go back to the conventional education system, I went to a university and studied archaeology and cultural heritage. So in a nutshell, that was my journey, where it was more of self-drive and then meeting with the community and players that saw that I was at that young age was showing interest and promise. And they took me on their wings and gave me all the resources and the support and the instruction that led me to this career.
Amazing. Yeah, I love the start with your grandfather and then, you growing up as a teenager. I love the story with a mentor as well, because we know that can play such a big role in someone's life, isn't it?
Exactly. No, I think they are very crucial.
So, talking of today now, how would you describe yourself as an artist today? Do you practice regularly, every day? And also, what type of art do you create on what medium to know you better?
Yeah. So I would describe myself as a visual artist. So I'm a painter. I create paintings. I've sort of a description I'll put is that I tell visual stories of my surrounding and my environment, my thoughts. So I would, instead of talking about it or writing, I would paint about it. So I'm a visual storyteller, which AKA painter. And so I practice every day. I have a studio here in Cape Town. I have a studio also in Zimbabwe. So whenever I'm in both cities, I am able to create work. This is because these are also two different environments. So there's very different influences in those two locations. And some of the ideas come from different places and end up in these storytelling, these visual storytelling series of artworks.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, that gives us a flavor of what you do, and it's good to know, artists do create every single day. That's what you do. So, what would you say are the biggest characteristics of your art? Like, if I see a piece from you, what would make me say it is a piece by Richard Mudariki?
For me, I think it will be, I use a lot of, as I said, I'm a storyteller. So I'm always telling stories about now, and I use a lot of humor. Obviously, there's a certain style, I think, with any artist. I call it my handwriting, which is different, or voice. But I will say a handwriting rather than calling it a style. And it's very particular use of color and flat surfaces, and I play around with the composition well. And in combining all that to create a visual story of whatever topic that I think is important for me to tell a story about at the time. So it could be social, political, economic, or environmental. And then I try to say, how do I interpret whatever I'm feeling and whatever I think about this, what is going on in my immediate environment, or even globally, and put it in a painting.
Yeah, and we're going to talk a little bit about that because your work is really interesting. So I never asked this question to anybody before. Let's try it with you.
Okay.
What would you describe as the perfect piece of art in your eyes and in your own terms? And it's really more a question that you can answer as you wish, but more to understand what matters to you. So what would be the perfect piece of art in your eyes?
For me, it's always difficult because I've always said maybe the next perfect artwork or the next masterpiece is yet to be made. It doesn't exist yet because we don't know what the future holds. But for me, a perfect artwork is one that has simplicity, but then it's powerful, that it's simple in how it's made and how the artist has used sort of elements in a simple form, but has a powerful impact. Then I think it's always interesting. You need to see that rather than explain it for it to say that's a perfect piece. But I think simplicity, which is always very difficult to do in art because you always want to add on things, but simplicity and then straightforwardness is with a few strokes of brushwork. In this instance, speaking about a painting, brushworks and lines, and then there comes out a perfect artwork.
Yeah, I was actually thinking about this question before we started the conversation, and the only thing I came with is it has to make me feel something, when you see it, if it's a visual, as you said, or it's like music, as soon as you see it, it's got to make you feel something special, isn't it?
Exactly. No, indeed. Now, it is obviously then it has to ignite some sort of feeling and reaction from the viewer. And I think that's why they always say art is very subjective because everyone is themselves individual. So we can't all sort of agree on what will be a masterpiece or not.
Yeah, and we don't react the same way to a piece of art, and it's not going to resonate the same with everybody, isn't it?
Definitely.
So, Richard, what inspires you the most to create? What is your drive when it comes to art? I think you gave us a flavor already of what inspires you, but if we dive a bit deeper into this, what's your
Yeah,
inspiration?
I always think as an artist or any other artist, not even me, I'd say, I think I am able to present a vision of my thoughts, of the way I see the world, different and a unique way as opposed to anyone else. As I said, everybody is individual. So I'm actually saying, look to the world through my eyes kind of a situation. This is how I see it, and this is how I'm presenting the artwork. And I think that opportunity and that responsibility is important. And I think that's what inspires me more to be able to be part of this global community and be able to contribute a cultural object that might outlive me and survive, and people could use it to interpret a specific time and a specific space and a specific vision of person who depicted an event that happened in the world.
Yeah, I love the answer, I must say. I always say, we all have agency, we all have choice. And when you can exercise this, it's powerful because we all have a voice and we can create in our own ways. We don't forcefully have to be called an artist.
Indeed.
So, Richard, do you believe in the power of art for change? Because it's obviously a big theme that you explore through the podcast with various people. I was saying to you, we interview scientists, artists, explorers, etc. But I think art for change matters to you. So, can you tell us about that?
So I think art is quite a broad. I'll be speaking more of visual arts, but I do believe in essence, I think it has been part of human history for a long time. I think the earliest humans first knew how to create an artwork before they knew how to make food. Like prehistoric art predates agriculture. So literally means that people made paintings in the caves before they learned how to make food and plant. So it's actually part of humanity, and that's why many people sort of respond to it. And I believe it has its role in society, in the world, in actually igniting people and making them realize certain things that are happening that needs to be changed or that needs to be looked at and resolved. And I think in that aspect, because I think artists themselves, receivers that receive sort of, if I want to compare it to like an electrical receiver, that it receives some waves of things that are happening in the world, but then they interpret it so that the message that people get is sort of not of the ordinary. They kind of get this waves and this information interpreted and presented in a way that is either unique and enlightening and inspiring, that it might change the status quo rather than just being told it in a more clear and I don't know if you understand what I'm trying to, in a more conventional way, so to speak. Like I would say, I'd look at an example of Picasso's Guernica painting. I think that's just coming out of my head, how it was used to stop the war. That whole painting traveled the world and was seen in places where people were actually marching in Spain and around Europe to stop the war that was happening at the time. And that's just an example of how an actual artwork created by an artwork and the imagery being very important and being used to depict and people to march and do certain things to stop something that was happening. We have a similar situation here in South Africa where an artist called Brad Murray also highlighted a leader in South Africa, and then there was a march actually in the streets, and it actually also showed just that a single image has powerful motives that would actually make society and people move in search for answers.
Yeah, and we are very visual creatures. So when you create powerful visual art, it can be very powerful indeed.
Indeed, definitely.
So your work is well known for its intersection of politics and art. So I wanted to ask you, why is it a topic that interests you more particularly, and what do you aim to do with it?
Yes, so at the time I was with my mentor and growing up and getting into the to get all the resources and the support and developing my practice. I was living in Zimbabwe at the time, circa around 2005, 2006, or 2007, 2008, where there was this heightened political environment in my home country. My only response to what was happening was to actually paint it and depict it in my artwork. So that at a time where they seemed, and it wasn't only me, I think a whole lot of other artists from Zimbabwe at the time were speaking about the politics in their country, and they were reacting to the environment in their work. And so that led me to have this interest in politics, because that was my environment, and where political policies and activities were actually affecting the community and the society I was living in, and the economy as well. And that's how I decided then to focus work that speaks about what I am experiencing at the time. And as I said, I was a visual teller, and I was telling stories of my immediate environment and depicting it in these visual story using allegory, humor, and I think a little bit of symbolism as well to create images of my work, which then led me, because the environment was so not toxic so much, it was enriching, because there were so many things to talk about, but there was no community and there was no other resources. Then that led me to leave and look for a community and a support group, and eventually obviously a market for my work in South Africa. And that's where I moved around 2008, 2009, also in the height of financial crisis in the world, to South Africa, and got also another community of artists and art critics and gallerists that led me to have my first solo exhibition that then focused on all these stories that I had gathered whilst living in Zimbabwe, to have my first solo exhibition titled My Reality, which was my reality in Zimbabwe, which the reality at the time was highly politicized. And I depicted those sentiments and those ideas and all those emotions in these paintings.
Honestly, I find it so interesting, because it's also living a testimony of what's happening in real time through art, and it's a piece that stays, obviously, so you can also refer back to it, and then it's a part of most of the country's history, isn't it?
Yes, indeed.
Part of the country's history. I found this so interesting. So I actually discovered your work through a recent innovative project that really caught my eyes, and that's why I invited you, because I thought it was such a good idea. So the project is called, I hope I get it right, the 2025 Artists General Elections. So can you tell us about this project? What was the inspiration and the idea around it?
Yes, so I'm happy to hear that it had reached and sparked your interest. So 2023 to 2024 was a very special period, I think, in the world of politics, because we had over 100, I think most countries in the world went to elections, from the UK to the US to Zimbabwe, South Africa, where I'm from, most Southern African countries, Rwanda, Botswana, Namibia. So it was such a special period, such a time where a real shift in geopolitics was supposed to happen. And I think obviously that was as a result of COVID. Maybe elections that were supposed to happen earlier had to be postponed because of the pandemic. But then that created this time, this period in history where all nations of the world were literally going to select a leader to lead them. And we were in this post-pandemic period where there was a lot of change as well, and a lot of things happening that interested me. As I was obviously, I am very much having all my tentacles on what's happening politically so that I could also depict it in my work. So that was quite an interesting thought and an interesting idea that all countries were going into elections. And was then the idea, say, what if we could imagine a world that is led by creatives in the politicians that we had, obviously seeing what the results has been in many countries, that there's always this polarity of some people saying, yes, this was the right choice and this wasn't, and saying artists are anyway showcasing and sort of publicizing whatever works and ideas they do every day to us in a similar way that politicians do. So if it's a painter, you are creating paintings and artworks. And what about if we took those things and put them into what I call election posters? Because that's what we saw in countries like Zimbabwe and South Africa and all over the world, where there was elections posters all over the cities with political leaders vying for people's votes. And then I think what was quite important was the American vote for me, that actually then led to the idea being cemented in my head to say this actually could work, because there was this movement called Artists for Kamala Harris. The artists, many leading artists in South Africa, from Jeff Koons to a whole lot of sort of the top artists in the world, donating works for Kamala Harris's campaign against Donald Trump. And I was literally having artists being involved in a candidate who's running for a presidential and giving their own creations for an auction, and then having a group, obviously this website called Artists for Kamala. I knew there was an artist who created posters, including Stephen, I've forgotten his name, who created obviously the Obama poster that was also very well recognized with the words hope at the time. And so that has always then shown me that, there is definitely a role that artists play in political discourse anyway, and especially in elections, at the election times. And I'm sure even people that design election posters are also graphic designers, and they are visual people, and they are artists, and they have to choose the colors and the imagery as well. So that then put everything together and say, instead of having politicians, let's imagine a world that is led by creatives. If we could select artists that could be in the positions of power, what would the world look like in the next 5 years? Because politicians stay in office for 5 years, and that's how the idea came about. And say, instead of saying an election for UK or France, or let's call it the artist general elections, it's all non-national. The artists are all artists in the world, and they could lead creative future, if that's a word.
Well,
But then leading to realize, so we launched the exhibition at the Investec Cape Town Art Fair. So I thought that would be, because then you have a gathering of people who are all interested in contemporary art. And then I collaborated with a few artists that we used their work to create election posters that we then exhibited at the Cape Town Art Fair. And in that space, we had the posters on the wall, and then we created an election booth where actually we had the visitors to the art fair and to the booth to literally vote for an artist, and placed it in a ballot box, and then be participating, having this participatory interactive art installation as well. And then we eventually then had a lot of people, actually had more than 2,000 people vote in a period of 4 days. So it was very exciting for many people, because they had voted obviously in the state election, and now they have this other vote, which is making them reimagine what the world could be if we had actually had an opportunity to vote for an artist. Strange enough, I got comments from many of the people that we already have artists that are in positions of power. A gentleman, I think was from America, was mentioning that in any case, Donald Trump is an actor, so he's already an artist. but he was one of the leading countries in the one of the powerful countries in the world. It was funny because when I saw him with Zelensky from Ukraine, who was also an actor, an artist, in the Oval Office, was just proof that, well, we were not too far-fetched in thinking that artists could actually lead the world, because here is two presidents in one of the powerful places in the world sitting and discussing, and they all have a background of being in the film and entertainment industry, and hence they're artists. And so it's not, we already have the artists that have already been voted into power. So it wasn't far-fetched, but it was quite interesting. And I think overall what we were trying to, with this project, was to also make artists realize they have an important role in the political discourse as well, with whatever they will be creating in their work. In this instance, I tried to work with artists in this project that, in any case, their work has been speaking about democracy, has been speaking about social, speaking about power, speaking about challenging the status quo. So we made a call out to all the artists internationally. We used Instagram to get to artists who we selected that their work, in any case, speaks of the politics in their different nations and time and environment. And we managed to get a few who, at the time, as you know, artists are quite difficult to pin down if when you working globally. But we managed to select a few who managed to be one person from each continent, and we held the election between the 21st and the 23rd of February this year. And yeah, had 2,000 voters. We had about 800 and something spoiled votes as well. And at the end, what was exciting was we didn't want to have an overall winner, because we wanted it to be as well creative. So what was the winning, the winner of the election wasn't a person, but an artwork. The artwork is called Art. It's the ballot paper. The 2,000 ballot papers were used by an artist to create an artwork, which then becomes the winner. Speaking about the participatory, if we all participate in an event, all our contributions are important to create progress or development, is what this whole exercise and this whole installation and this whole artistic intervention wanted to highlight at the end.
Yeah. I mean, congratulations, because that's such a great idea and such a great achievement to hear, everything that was involved, and that it also worked so well. And obviously it did grab my attention. I thought that was so original. And then, as you said very rightly, I actually didn't know there were 100 elections in that time period, and that's just incredible. And we all know there are so many political tensions at the moment. As you rightly said, everybody has been looking at the US as a great democracy. I mean, there are always problems in every country, as we know, but we are seeing a lot of things going backwards from a democratic point of view, in terms of rights, in terms of inequalities, in terms of environmental commitments, and so on. And to see a whole artistic movement, using this as the inspiration to convey a message, it's incredible, and I absolutely love what you've been doing with it. So the exhibition, as you said, poses the question, what would the world look like if artists were given positions of power and influence? So we're going to ignore Donald Trump is an artist. So how do you think the world would look like? Because I love that it challenges us to look at politics in a different way and perhaps reimagine it.
Exactly. No, indeed. I think it will be interesting for me to also find out what the world would look like. But I'll give my perspective. I think it will be more the use of the non-conventional thinking, not even thinking out of the box, so taking the box away and create something else. I think to most of the challenges in the world, I think creativity is something that we have. inborn with even as children, but we lose it because we enter this formality and these rules that are created, and we lose our other sort of sixth mind or sixth, or I don't know, the other side of us that allows us to think outside the normal convention, the normal rules, and make things work better for the world. So I think if artists are given opportunities to do so, because they have in their own system an inbuilt to just not look at the ordinary, the mainstream, and think outside whatever has been done, I think that could help solve problems maybe with climate change, with wars, with economic and poverty, and a whole lot of other challenges being faced by the world. So I would be asking, why don't we give those topics to artists and say, okay, bring a group of artists in a conference somewhere at the UN or the Commonwealth or African Union and say, okay, we're having this conference, the politicians are posing all these, or the world is posing all these problems to you. It can not only be visual artists, it could also be musicians and all other actors, all other creative people in a room, pose them the questions and say, let's have a policy document that you as creatives could create to solve the world's problems, and we look at it as as a working document. And I think that if that opportunity is ever been given, I think it will be interesting what would come out from creatives, from people who are actually thinking in a different mindset than what we have been having over the past centuries, actually, or even since the beginning of democracy. Nothing like that has ever been done.
I would certainly advocate for that. I mean, there has been progress, and whether it's the UN or the COPs, the Conference of the Parties, artists are more invited than it was the case. So that's great to start to see that recognition. But yeah, your vision is interesting, and perhaps we will get there at some point.
Perhaps, yeah.
Okay, so Richard, I wanted to ask you also, what would you say are the broader social and environmental themes that influence your work outside of the ones we've discussed? Are there any other themes that you like to explore, if we pick a couple perhaps?
Yes, for me, especially living now in this era that we live in, which is the more information and digital age, and how that has affected society, especially with the pandemic being a catalyst to us moving to a more digitized world. I think there must be, for me, interesting ways of how art and artists should interact in that new age that we're living in terms of how the traditional sort of ways and notions of how art has been displayed and consumed needs to be also following up with the times. So I try to come up with exhibitions that are quite more innovative and interesting through that engagement from people who are in any case distracted by whatever technology they are with, be it social media or the news or this digital, and bring them to the creative and artistic side and still show that art, especially visual arts in my instance, it still has a role to bring us back to reality, because I always think artificial intelligence and artificial takes you to something that doesn't really exist. It's made up, so to speak. That's why it's called artificial, augmented reality. So it's not real, and then really take you to real things that are made by hand, are made by a person, are made by someone that actually could help you engage in and even transform or just beautify or encourage you emotionally to be happy, to recognize something, to record, to live with it, to enjoy it, apart from spending almost more than 12 hours or so stuck on a phone. And obviously then how sort of the Gen Zs and these new generation of people, global citizens, could engage with it. So not our traditional ways of just going to an art museum and a gallery, but having other sort of means of how we could engage with contemporary art. And that's how a couple of years ago during COVID started an artist-led project called ArtHARARE, in sort of also then looking at the artists that are from my home country in Zimbabwe, as well as its diaspora who are living all over the world, and saying, how do we present in this new age of technological advancements of information, artificial intelligence, how do we still remain relevant? And then in that relevance, still create works that is innovative and challenging to the society and the environment we live today. In terms of environmental, there's always been that an artist is influenced by his environment. I was saying, if I was ever grew up in a beautiful little town with trees and nature and river and animals, most probably that will be what will be my focus in my painting. I'll be a landscape artist. But I grew up and developed my practice in Zimbabwe, a highly politicized environment, a lot of social, political, economic challenges, and that's what ended up being the focus of my practice and developing from there. So I think the environment, in the sense of just being your surroundings, is very important. And as artists, we are in any case human. We don't live separately from other people. So we also do need clean air, clean water, an environment that still allows us to use our creativity and survive as human. So I think pollution and all these other environmental matters do affect artists as well, because they're in any case human, and we do need to also advocate that the environment be protected for the benefit of humanity.
Yeah, amazing. I really love how you keep in touch with the now and the reality of what's happening now. I really love that. I think that comes very strongly from you and your work, and how you look at evolving your work and your exhibitions as well. That's great. So you just mentioned this, and that's my next question to you. Because you are not only a great artist, but also, from what I've seen from you, a multi-entrepreneur and founder. And you are especially the founder of ArtHARARE, located in Cape Town, and you describe it as a nexus for experiencing contemporary art practice from Zimbabwe and its diaspora, so people from Zimbabwe who are abroad, right?
That's correct, yes.
So can you tell us, when did you create ArtHARARE? Because that's a really interesting project. And what were your motivations? And what are you aiming to do with it?
Yes, so I think ArtHARARE was born during a time of difficulties, which is in 2020. So launched it in 2020 during the height of the pandemic, where we were all locked down in our homes because of this sort of disease that was moving around, COVID. Fortunately, it led to many people losing their lives. So it was a very difficult time. And as I said, I was always thinking of ways of how, even prior to COVID, of how artists from Zimbabwe who have been practicing all over the world and creating very interesting and innovative work could come together. And then despite the COVID, that 2020 being a horrible year, it provided the perfect opportunity, because everybody who had programs during that year, whether it was an exhibition, an artist residency, or a museum show, all got cancelled. And they were sitting in their homes or in their studios with the work that they were supposed to showcase. And that was a perfect opportunity for us to come together. And we already had works in our studios. I myself was supposed to be in Paris for an artist residency for 6 months, but I couldn't go because then there was travel restrictions. And I had work that I had within the studio, and then thought would come to do an online exhibition, because that's when the art world realized that online presence was important. And then there was all these platforms like virtual rooms and opportunities for artworks to be shown professionally, digitally. Apart from previous, it was just PDFs sent on emails, but now you could literally go on a website and have this space that you could see artwork presented. And that was an interesting time for me, and an interesting intersection of obviously technology and art at the time. And we decided to also be part of that, and then launched ArtHARARE in August 2020, did a call out on social media, and we had an overwhelming response from the artists, not even just Zimbabwean artists, but artists from all over the world, because obviously there was this non-activity in the art world at the time, because all the galleries and all the art fairs and all the other had cancelled all the activities, and they've moved online. And that's how we decided to do something creative, something innovative for the creatives from Zimbabwe. Launched ArtHARARE, because most of the artists, even though they were either in Zimbabwe, in South Africa, in the UK, in Canada, or in America, they had a connection with Harare, which is the capital of Zimbabwe. And we were all artists and creating art, and we're from Harare, and we called it ArtHARARE, in which I think in line with the other art sort of institutions like Art Basel, which is art, and the city of Basel, Art London, Art Paris. So even Cape Town Art Fair, there is that element that the city is important as well, and the artists actually shape the creative development of many cities in any case. So hence the name ArtHARARE in this instance. So we had our first online exhibition in December 2020, and then it was with such success that we decided to do it the following year and the year after. And then COVID was we were going back to normal around 2021, 2022. And we thought we could also activate projects in Harare itself and around the world where the other diasporan artists were working, and having this sort of not identity but belonging of us being from Zimbabwe, and having a platform where we're saying this is us, this is our stories, and this is where we come from as creatives and artists.
Totally amazing. I love the story behind it. And it's often that I hear people have started new ventures like this during COVID because of everything you've described. But the fact that you were talking of having your tentacles everywhere, now you have your artistic tentacles everywhere in the world as well through this project, which is amazing. So I wanted to ask you to bring it a bit to life. Can you tell us about an artist you have worked with through ArtHARARE that you particularly like, and what is it about their work that touches you? If you want to bring someone to the stage for us.
Exactly. No, I do have someone who's very special. There's an artist called Wilfred Timire, a very talented young artist living and working in Harare currently. We actually made a video because he won an award that we issued as ArtHARARE in 2021, and that actually catalyzed his career to be discovered by many other galleries and international events, and ended up in imported art collections as well in the world. So Wilfred Timire works with sacks. So the sacks that Zimbabwe is such an agricultural community, the packaging that they use to put potatoes and grain is these woven plastic sacks. So they're very much abundant in his environment. So also speaking about environment, and people usually throw it away, and he uses that to create these beautiful tapestries of artworks that actually depict the environment that he lives in today, which is all the social and the economic challenges that people face. He always depicts the produce actually that those sacks carry, which is, if it's either used in trade, so he always depict people carrying cement who are in the building trade, or selling potatoes in the streets that use the sacks to carry the potatoes and the tomatoes, and he uses that material to actually create his work. So we've been working with him since we launched ArtHARARE, and he has had successful shows. Last year we did his first solo exhibition in Cape Town when we collaborated with the Silo Hotel, which is in a very prominent and is in the same building with Africa's first contemporary art museum, the Zeitz Museum of Contemporary Art Africa. And we launched his first solo exhibition there to much success. And it was quite interesting because the building where the exhibition was a granary, which is, it used to keep grain in it, and grain is usually carried by sacks. And here is the artist using that material to create artworks that speaks about the contemporary in a luxury museum, in a luxury hotel called the Silo Hotel, in a building that was once a granary. So that intersection and that was quite interesting and And I think very much a challenge to many people to think about reality, about the history of places, and about commerce, and then eventually about art, and how an artist, in this instance, Zimbabwe, in its very difficult economic situation, artists struggle to get the traditional art materials like your paints and your canvases to create traditional artworks. But then they have all these resources of other materials that could be used to create art. And in this instance, Wilfred Timire does an amazing job. And as I said, the simplicity is what actually for me is, because he uses these materials in a very simple way to create powerful works. So he'll be one of the artists that I would definitely say he is creating these beautiful tapestries in a much more innovative, much more exciting, and has a bright future. And we're very proud to be working with him.
Right. So we'll have to check his work out, and we'll add a link in the show notes to his work if we can find it somewhere.
Yes. No, definitely we'll share those links with you.
Thank you. So one question I wanted to ask you, because obviously you are an artist, you could be focusing on your own work, but you do support all of these other artists. So do you enjoy this role of curating, showcasing people, supporting them in their career? Is it something important to you?
Yes, no, definitely. I was supported by others, including my mentor, Helen Liros, who also owned the gallery as well. And I always say it would be a pity. I think someone mentioned that it's a pity to leave somebody who's talented alone without a support group, because they need that for them to grow. It's like having fertilizer and water so that your talent could grow. So that's what that support group is. And for me, that's why I even went to a location where I thought I could get that support group, that community. And even throughout artistic history, artists have left. Like, I think Picasso left to go to Paris. People leave to go to the art centers of the world, if it's New York or London. And from there, they meet communities of people, and then they flourish thereafter. So I think it's what I'm trying to create with ArtHARARE. We live now in a global world where success could happen anywhere. And hence, I think I would say, in this instance, we started online. So ArtHARARE started online. So it was that community that existed online. But now with the world being so connected, we could be having exhibitions anywhere in the world, but still have that singularity of us saying we are from this single place called Zimbabwe. And I think I do actually enjoy being in my studio and creating my own work. But now there's this added responsibility, because I had the responsibility, obviously, of telling stories. But I also thought, wow, how more can I contribute apart from telling stories to other artists that are seeing, that have powerful stories, that have so much to contribute to the discourse of contemporary art on the continent and in the world. Let me create a platform. And this has not only been myself, a whole lot of other artists have been doing that, especially artists that have been successful in their careers. They go back to their home countries and create these platforms for the next generation of artworks, because there's always been this notion that there's no institutions in Africa. We have to go to the West for the museums and for all these foundations. And for me, I'm saying the artists themselves are creating the institution, not in the white cubes of Europe, but in our own sort of unique African way, and collaborating with local artists and creating this mentorship as well. So the artist has been successful, and they can become a mentor for the artists that are younger and they want to become a professional artist. So for me, I'm always just thinking I'm just joining this movement, if I can call it a movement, of local Africans from different parts of the continent creating platforms for the next generation of artists. Because, as I say, a talented artist need a community, need a platform for them to flourish.
Yeah, I really love to see that type of community support. I really think that can make such a difference in people's lives. I think you told us yourself for your own experience as an artist, and it's amazing that you can do this for others. And I think it's important also to do that. So that leads me to my next question, because I think you've exhibited abroad to do. So I wanted to ask you, what have you learned from your experience at other art hubs across the globe? Has it played an important role for you as an artist? And what's the difference for you between local art and global representation?
I see. Yeah. No, I think I had the privilege of showcasing my work in different parts of the world. And I think for me, what I have picked up from all that experience and all that exposure is there's no one size fits all. If you go to London, it's a different kind of vibe. If you go to New York, to Europe, maybe to Amsterdam, to other parts of the world, to Zurich, it's all different. And it's also because that all these environments are in any case different, and different locales and different cultures. And I think that has made me realize that there's no one size fits all for one to be an artist. And I've always said to the artists that I work with, create your own rules. You are the creator of the artworks. You are the expert in what you do. You can't have another person to tell you that, oh, we think this is the direction. So that, I think, has helped me to realize that if you are saying you're an artist from Zimbabwe, from South Africa, from Ghana, from Canada, you are the expert of that type of artwork and the sort of culture and whatever creative work that you're producing, because you're infected with your environment and your idea and where you come from. And I think that has come from the realization of traveling and being in these spaces on residencies and art exhibitions, to realize that you really do need to have that individualistic voice, obviously with a global outlook, with sort of some of the conventional things, but you definitely need to make your own. A huge impact.
That's a great message, Richard. I love this. So talking of message, before we finish, is there any particular message you would like to give to artists who would watch us today, whether they are aspiring artists, just starting, or more established?
I see. Yeah, no, I'll use my mentor who always say, create good work and everything else follows. I think that's
I like your mentor.
best. Yeah, to create the best work that anyone could ever do and put in. Because I always think being an artist means you have to contribute yourself more and practice and be very, very patient and serious in whatever you're doing. In that, I always say the angels of the art world will grant you the creativity to actually then come up with masterpieces, because I think that's what makes everything else important. So she usually always say, keep the hits coming. So which is always creating the good work and everything else will happen thereafter.
Yeah, and I wish you all a lot of masterpieces, because I know that's always the quest, isn't it? So this podcast is called Shades of Life, with the idea that we each hold the power to paint life with our own colors, to leave a meaningful imprint on the planet. So I always end the podcast with the same question for the guest and for you, Richard, today. If you were a color, what would it be and why? And it can be anything you want and for any reason you want.
Okay, I think my color will be yellow ochre, which is, I think, yellow ochre is a color of much of the soil in the world.
I love that. I love that color, actually. Amazing. So we'll take this as the inspiration for the day. And thank you for bringing your own color to the podcast today. It was such a pleasure to have you. I encourage people to discover more of your work. We'll share some through the podcast and through the magazine. I think I'm going to have to write an article about your work.
If there's beef, pass me the and I'm busting a rocket, ayy.
And so thank you for joining me today, and thank you everyone for watching and listening.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Never them. It's 100 that I'm better than.